It's 2023 and we somehow live in an age where I am spoiled for choice when it comes to old school first-person shooters. That's something I wouldn't have expected to see 10 years ago, yet here we are. But not all of them capture the essence of classic Doom in the same way that Supplice does. A game that just takes a decades-old formula and shows why it hasn't aged a day. This retro-styled FPS comes from MechWorks, a small team of people who are well known in the Doom modding scene, and that's no coincidence. Supplice as a concept dates all the way back to 2009, where it started as a mod. Since then, it has been reworked and revised countless times, and has now landed on Steam's Early Access program as a standalone commercial product. And their publisher, Hyperstrange, has generously provided me with a review copy, free of charge. The year is 2207 and the PTC Corporation has grown so powerful that they effectively control the Earth and turned it into an industrialized hellscape. A group of rebels decide that enough is enough and set off to deep space in search of a new home, eventually settling on the distant planet of Methuselah. You play as an engineer working on terraforming the planet, when one day the colony gets invaded by unknown forces. The game hurls you headfirst into the action, and from here you start discovering more of the world and the situation you're in through the terminals scattered over the levels. You quickly get in contact with Karen, an AI that is part of the greater network established on the planet. Something went haywire and Karen wants to calm the situation before it gets worse. However, it doesn't have security access to many of the ship's functions, and kindly suggests you follow its instructions to help it regain control if you want any chance of surviving. At its most basic, it's a retro FPS story, an excuse to dump you next to a horde of uglies about to get blasted in the face. But there is a mystery unraveling here, and it puts a big question mark on Karen's character. Supplice may have Doom as its key inspiration, but the developers also quote Marathon, a trilogy of first-person shooters developed by Bungie. If you're somewhat familiar with Marathon's bonkers lore, you are probably swimming in a sea of red flags right now. Karen is the science AI, so normally it isn't supposed to take control of the security and military components of the network. Unfortunately, the AI in charge of those is currently unreachable, and protocol says that Karen is next in line due to this extraneous situation, or in its own words, no longer shackled by an obsolete directive. You also find chat logs exchanged between staff members that suspect this situation might have been an inside job, and one of the lead researchers sends out a warning that Karen might have been compromised. So the question is, can you trust Karen? And for that matter, can you actually trust the top figures of the colony, or are they hiding some skeletons in their space closets? And what's the deal with the protagonist's name being Zora Null? That's a strangely meaningful name, isn't it? Almost as if there's more to her than just being a simple worker. Between all that, the game also puts in an effort to describe how life's going in this accursed space rock, making it more than your usual tech-based environment. Some of the terminals include various messages posted to not Twitter, or as the people affectionately call it, SOCNET. In face of the imminent peril, Supplice is happy to provide some comedic relief through Karen's robotic and analytical way of speaking and through the office talk of the colony's citizens, getting frustrated at how even in the distant future, failures continue to happen for the dumbest reasons. The gameplay doesn't hold many surprises. shoot enemies, pick up health and ammo, find switches and card keys to open locked doors, and access the terminals to complete your objectives. You have these massive levels that twist and turn and intersect, but it rarely becomes confusing or results in the player getting lost. The map screen shows points of interest, and the game also does a good job at signposting stuff through clever level design. Things like keeping keycards or other important points visible, or having switches in front of the area you just opened. You should also keep an eye out for hidden passages or suspicious walls, as each level is packed with secret areas full of goodies, and many of them hide pickups that increase your maximum health, armor or ammo capacity. While the story is probably cooking some galaxy brain twists in the background, the core gameplay is as straightforward as it gets. It's not something you have to think about or strategize all that much. It's all about reflexes and spatial awareness. And if getting your face bitten off wasn't a problem, you could appreciate the artistry behind these environments. The game runs on GZ Doom, which is a source port that vastly extends the capabilities of the original Doom engine, and the developers made full use of that. It gives the visuals an authentic feel since they are built on old technology being pushed beyond its intended limits, rather than built on modern technology attempting to recreate the past. If you have played Doom or any custom WADs through a modern source port, the feel of everything should be very familiar. The movement, the weapons, and the visual features are all intact. That goes for the half-meat, half-machine monstrosities you encounter too, some of which resemble and behave similarly to enemies from classic Doom. You have the soldiers with hit-scan rifles and shotguns, the chain gunners, the brain troopers with ranged projectiles, the lizard guys with fast charging attacks. Nice butt cheeks, by the way. This is also one of those games where the difficulty changes the number and type of enemies that appear in each level, which is always great because it makes you rethink your approach to each encounter, which is something that a simple damage adjustment doesn't do. To help you obliterate these jerks, you have at your disposal a number of cool toys of destruction. You start the game armed only with your trusty pile bunker, which is pretty effective at grinding alien meat. Besides its close-range attack, it can also project a shockwave with surprisingly good range and damage. This runs on a charge, which slowly recovers over time, but can be greatly sped up by drilling enemies. There's also an overcharge pickup that greatly increases its damage and causes it to set enemies on fire. Soon enough, you'll find an assault rifle, capable of consistent single shots, or of zooming in and firing a burst of bullets. Individual shots aren't particularly powerful, but it can also be dual-wielded, doubling its damage output. The rotary shotgun packs 3 barrels, and while one is already quite effective at close range, unleashing all 3 at the same time is even better and more satisfying. The cyclo-mortar serves as a grenade launcher of sorts, launching weaker flaming projectiles that cause a smaller explosion, or a stronger projectile that creates a bigger explosion that scatters bouncing flames around it. The minigun speeds up as it fires, raining a hail of bullets on anyone in front of you. It eats ammo like popcorn, but it's brutally effective. It shares ammo with the assault rifle and can also be deployed as a turret, automatically firing on enemies while you're free to do something else. These are the ones I have managed to find, but the rest have been shown in PR footage and are programmed into the game and functional, just not normally available in episode 1 to my knowledge, unless I missed them in a secret. So far, my impressions have been quite positive, but there are a few points that could use some improvements. The first one is that certain areas are just too dark. Sometimes this is with good intentions, like in the first level where some of the lights are out and enemies are hiding and waiting for unsuspecting victims. However, it also makes it hard to see where enemies are, and can result in a lot of cheap shots since there isn't much indication of those enemies' presence. This could be alleviated through more noticeable sounds and maybe by giving enemies some visual touch that indicates their presence in the dark before they start attacking. Stuff like glowing eyes or some sort of light. I don't know. You can also adjust the sector light setting in the advanced options menu, but this changes how the entire game's lighting is rendered, which can easily break the look that the developers intended, so it's not an optimal solution. These situations are momentary and don't drag the game down much, but they do emerge enough times to be noticeable. Besides that, I just have some technical issues to point out. By default, Supplice runs on the OpenGL API, which is old and has problems fully utilizing modern processors. As a result, performance is pretty terrible in certain areas, but thankfully you can change to Vulkan, which should boost performance tremendously for most people. However, some areas still have some weird performance drops, and the reason why it seems like more than a simple lack of CPU resources is that it usually happens when looking in a specific direction, not when there is a ton of stuff going on. This might point to some assets not being coded properly, and continuing to be rendered even when they're not visible. I think it might also be a good idea to set the game's default renderer to Vulkan rather than OpenGL. Of course, this means that older graphics cards won't be compatible, and I understand that. But the performance is so bad with OpenGL that people running older PCs are likely to have problems running the game adequately anyway. Plus, this would probably cut down on people refunding for poor performance, since most modern GPUs already support the API and would benefit greatly from the boost it provides. Still, this is early access, and the developers are looking for player feedback to smash any bugs or polish the level design. The current version includes the first episode, composed of 5 levels, as well as a bonus called Terminal Melt, which gives you a taste of what's coming in later episodes. All of this should take around 3 hours to complete on a first playthrough. The plan is to have the remaining 5 episodes all released by the second quarter of 2024, with a new one coming out every 2 or 3 months. The price will remain at $15/euros until the full release, at which point it will increase to some unspecified value, but not more than 20. So far, I think the game is in a pretty good state, and if the rest of the episodes can maintain this level of quality, then it definitely gets a recommendation from me. Supplice is not a game that breaks any boundaries or brings about innovation, and the gameplay always sticks to a well-known formula. But it is also a game that executes that formula with flying colors.